Hello again and welcome back to another episode of Shallow Thoughts and Deep Shit. I'm Jefferson Lambert and I'll be your host for this atrocity as I journey through the mind of a serial misanthrope. If you want, you could rate the show, subscribe, and follow. And you could also follow me on X, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and check out the website at www.shallowthoughtsanddeepshit.com. Thank you for tuning in. Let's get started, shall we? Face in the rock. To whom this may concern, I am writing this with my feet because my arms are bound in a jacket made for people like me. The room I am in is padded, I suppose, so I won't bang my head against any hard surfaces. My lawyer made sure they gave me a crayon and some paper to write my story on. Afterwards, I guess I'll eat the crayon. My lawyer says they are going to put me to death tomorrow by means of electric chair. I am happy about that. I can't wait to ride the lightning. The people here at this institution are always probing me with needles and sticking electrodes to my skin. They do tests every day. Why? I couldn't tell you. Even if I could, I wouldn't, because by then my crayon would be too small to fit between my toes. I hope I have enough time and crayon left to tell you my story. This is how it happened. My practice was in a quaint 2-story brick building on the edge of town, which I will not mention the name. Psychiatry was my practice, if you need to know, but it really doesn't pertain to my story. I had just finished up with the last client of the day, Marge Sheffords, who in my book was one psychotic bitch. She had more problems than a friggin' Ford. Anyway, I was in the men's bathroom, washing up and getting ready for my usual walk home. I always kept my Jaguar at home in the summer. The walk home helped me to unwind after listening to freaks like Marge Sheffords all day long. I washed my hands in the sink and then downed a couple of Quaaludes with cool water from the faucet. Before I left the building, I stopped by my office and popped a couple more to keep the other two company. Just another day at the office. I stepped out of the air-conditioned building into the stagnant August humidity, feeling the first 2 pills go to work on my brain. I loosened my tie a notch and slung my jacket over my shoulder. The other people on the street walked about like robotic drones. I was sweating bullets after just a few short steps. That humidity clings to you out there. There were quite a few cars on the streets, as I remember, people trying to rush home at the peak of rush hour. That sun was still blistering, even though it was 5 o'clock already. I passed the business district on Market Street and turned right onto Danforth Avenue toward my house. Ahead, the park would be filled with children laughing and screaming as they climbed the monkey bars and played on the seesaws and swings, as nervous mothers watched anxiously. I often stopped on the sidewalk in front of the park and watched as the kids soared higher and higher on the swings. Some of the moms were rocking baby carriages gently as the children laughed and screamed across the playground like wild banshees. Sometimes I wish that I would settle down someday and marry a beautiful wife and start a family instead of always going home to a dark, empty house. Of course, Sid was there, waiting for me, but I hardly call a German Shepherd a family. Well, Sid is my family. He's all I've got. I walked on home past the small patch of woods with the park coming into view ahead on my right. My head was light, and I was starting to feel rather pleasant from the Quaaludes. I had almost reached the bordering property of the park when suddenly something from within the woods made me stop in my tracks. I heard this piercing, whining screaming coming from within the bushes and trees off the side of the road. I thought at first it was a couple of kids playing in there, but as I walked further, I listened, trying to hear over the bastard cars that drove by with their noisy motors. I did hear a child in there wailing. sounded like an infant, and it was screaming at the top of its fucking lungs. It was crying, screaming. It was the deathliest sound I heard come from the lips of a human being. I remember wincing and holding my ears as I left the sidewalk and ducked into the underbrush of the woods, wondering why in the hell some bitch let her child wander off from the park. The crying persisted. I thought my ears might have been bleeding, but the cops and judge later told me differently 1,000 times. It felt like someone was stabbing my ears with an ice pick. Someone or something in there was hurting, and hurting badly. I hurried through the underbrush, stepping in mud and fresh deer shit, cursing the bitch who left her kid unattended. I was pissed. The crying grew louder, and it sounded like a cry for help. I stumbled into a small clearing covered with leaves and pine needles and fallen twigs. I didn't see anything. The crying was shattering my eardrums as I looked around. I cupped my ears harder and dropped my jacket on the ground as the forest floor started to ripple like a wave on a pond before my very eyes. Yes, I was quite stoned by then, but still in complete control. Of course, the cops and judge told me differently on that, too. I started to pick the burrs off my pant leg, and then I froze. I looked down at my feet, and embedded into the ground in front of me was a gray rock in the shape of an egg, or an oval, or perhaps the shape of a head. I mean, this rock's surface formed the perfect impression of a child's face. Its mouth was wide open, and it was screaming. I could hear my skull vibrating as my brain rattled inside my head. On and on it droned as I stood over the face in the rock. I could feel the sweaty, humid air blanketing me like wool. It was so friggin' hot. My mind was going berserk, pulling in a million directions at once. The anger consumed me. I had to put a stop to that noise that shrieked through my very bones. Clear tears streamed down its strained, ghastly face, and then I knew it had to be put out of its misery. I looked around the clearing trying to focus, but by then, I was feeling way too good to even see straight. Nothing but small dead sticks and twigs lay around on the earthen floor by my feet. Hanging over me was a tall evergreen tree with a trunk like that of a California redwood. Near its roots on the dirty forest floor, I finally found something that might do the trick. I found another rock, just the same size as the one that was screaming to death. I picked up the rock with 2 sweaty hands, feeling it moving around in my sweaty, agitated palms. That rock was heavy as hell, I remember, as I lifted it high above my head. I then brought that sucker down hard on top of the other one. The rocks smashed together and splattered like mush between my fingers. Both rocks shrieked in chorus with each other, and my head rocked in agony. The only good nerve left in my body at that point snapped like a rusty chain. The rock that was embedded in the ground at my feet had changed. It was all dented and disfigured now, but it was still crying. I forced the other rock over my head again and brought it down harder this time. As hard as my weak muscles could muster, I smashed them together as hard as I could. That time, the crying finally stopped. And thank God, too, because I thought I was going to go crazy. There was peace again inside my head. The ground still rippled, but I already got used to that. It was funny how the pills had shortened my temper back then. I looked down at the ruined rock and I was satisfied. I was glad. And I was really feeling good. That hideous face was gone. And best of all, there was silence again. So I left the woods and headed up Danforth Avenue to go home and fix my dinner as I usually did. I slid my key into my front door and I could hear the sirens nearing, coming from the downtown area. 2 state patrol cruisers sped past my house at lightning speed. I must have been polluted because I can hardly recall it now. I went inside and thought nothing of it at all. I skipped dinner that night because I decided I wasn't all that hungry anyway. Instead, I popped a few more Quaaludes and flipped on the TV and watched absolutely nothing with Sid at my heels. The police were at my door 20 minutes later. That day I was taken into custody and arrested. At the time, I had no idea why. The cops took me to the station and booked me. I protested like mad, I did. They were all screwed up with some crazy story. I must have told a dozen cops of my little walk home from work that day. I was completely innocent of any crime, and I still am. Oh, sure, I hear the cop story about the 2 kids who were severely beaten down in the woods by the park that day. They said both kids were dead at the scene with fractured skulls and head trauma or some damn thing. I can't remember. I've told them all that they were out of their minds. They appointed me this lawyer, that fellow from Nantucket. Nice fellow he is. After all, he did get me this crayon. But the bastard keeps telling me that the pills I took had a permanent effect on my brain. What pills? Does he mean the ones I took about 4 months ago back in August after Marge that day? They'll all learn that those tiny pills have nothing to do with this story. They had nothing to do with it, whatever the hell they're talking about. I just can't wait until tomorrow to be strapped into that chair and feel the lightning pulse through me. What fun it will all be. And then I hope they take me back to this nice, petted room to collect my thoughts, alone. Before I leave you and eat the rest of this crayon, let me ask you this. Who are you going to believe? Them or me?